Hello guys and welcome back. So this is the first time I'm opening Houdini, and this is the first UI that you will see. And to make it less confusing and to you guys, I'm going to hide all these shells. Well, that one will keep. This one we don't need. This one we don't need. This one we don't need. At this point in time, and this makes the application much easier to look at and a lot less things to worry about. I'm gonna close these guys as well, this part here, so we only have 3 panels to work with. Now this is obviously the viewport. You can click and rotate, you can middle click, hold to pan, and Alt right click to zoom in and out. Okay, and then the keys pardon me, the left click rotates, middle mouse pans, right click zoom in and out, zoom in and move the cursor to the right or to the left to zoom in and out, and then holding alt key and left click to rotate. Cool. So let's create some geometry. Now this is the area where we create the networks, and this is all the Houdini context that we talked about, and we're interested in the object context, which is SOPs. Now we talked in the previous video that we need to create a geometry holder. Okay, so the way to create nodes is by hitting the tab key. Okay, and then under geometry, we're going to create a geometry node. Now, there is all these guys that we can create as well, but you don't have to worry about any of that at this point. We're going to only create a geometry node. Okay, and think of this as a group that's going to contain all the data. So if we have a house made of a lot of blocks, all of those objects are going to be inside this. Now, by default, it has this preview or temp geometry, default geometry, and I'm gonna click away, and now I deselected the node, and you can select it, and this will show you the geometry property. Each node in Houdini has properties, and this is where you see them. Okay, now this is this geometry node. Think of it as a folder. When you double click inside this folder, you're gonna dive inside and see the data. But before I do that, let me explain what this is. Now this, if you hover over, it says display. You can hide it or show it in the viewport, and this is for selectable geometry. If you turn this off, you will not be able to select it from the viewport. Now the way to select things from the viewport is by changing the cursor, making sure that you're in this select mode, and then you can grab things in the viewport. Okay, cool. So this options here are for transforming this data at the object level, at the higher level. So you can move it up, you can scale it, you can rotate it, and Control Z to restore the values. Now let's dive inside. I'm gonna double click on this node, and you can see now we're under the object level, which is the SOP context inside this geometry data, and we have our file reader which reads in this this data. Now I'm gonna delete that, so we select the node and hit delete, and it's gone. Now let's create a box. I'm gonna hit tab, and the easiest way to create a node is by knowing their names. Pardon me, it's hard to remember where, I personally don't know where all the nodes that I use are located, so it's much easier to hit tab and type in the name. So for example, wanted to create a box, I hit tab and type in box and hit enter, and that will create the box with the default settings. You can see this is the property for the box. Now there's few, you can see there's few more icons here that we can click, and let's see what these guys mean. Now the first one is for display /render the node, and we're now viewing this. Because we only have one object, we cannot deselect it. We're going to be seeing one node, at least in this context. Let me create a copy of this to illustrate a few more things. Okay, so I Control-C, Control-V to make copies. And let me move it, and then I'll explain all this in a second. So let's say we have two nodes. We're viewing this node now. To view the other node, we have to click this button here. And now we're viewing box 3. Okay. This option is if you want to view other geometries, but in template mode. They're not selectable. You just see the wireframe. Okay. For example, I can view this, and I can click this purple, this template button here, and that will show the object templated along with this. Okay. Now this option here is to lock the data, which means it's going to store the actual geometry inside the file. We don't want that. We want everything to be procedural, so we're not going to use that. And this is for disabling the geometry. If you have, let's say, don't worry about this yet, but we'll explain everything. Let's say I have a box, and I'm going to subdivide that box. And I decided later, and then we're going to merge it with the other box using a merge node and view this result. If you decided that you don't want this node anymore, you can simply disable it, and that will gray it out, and it's not being used in that chain anymore. Cool. So let's go back. We have the box. If you select the node and hit enter in the viewport, let me verify this. You hit enter in the viewport, you get whatever is available to modify that data in the viewport. So in this case, we have this this manipulator that allows us to scale the object and move it. You can see as well it's changing all these options here. We can change them by hand, either by typing, or you can middle click and it will give you options to drag values and increment basically the changed value by this amount. So this will increase it 0.1 every time we drag in the mouse cursor, and this is for 0.01 or 10, and this applies to any attribute in Houdini. You can also use the slider, of course, and each object has different properties. So let's say we create a sphere, for example, and look at this sphere. It has a radius option on the X, Y, and Z. And with each of these objects, there is also different types. So we can say it's a primitive, which is basically a default primitive in Houdini. It's not polygons, so we can change it to polygon, and it's made of triangles, so we can increase the frequency of these triangles. And cool. So yeah, that's how it works. To pan, to move here, you middle click, same as the viewport. You middle click and pan, and then use the middle mouse scroll to zoom in and out. Okay. Now let's say we want to combine these two. Okay, I'm going to click here, and here you can see we have two different objects. I want to take this data and move it to the left. So I'm going to hit tab and create a transform node. Now I have the transform node. I'm going to click this button here. It will give me a wire, and I'm going to connect that wire. And now this box here is run through this transform, and we can take this data and move it. Now I'm going to select this node and hit enter in the viewport. I'm going to move it to the left. I can disable this if I needed to, and you can see the result with or without the transform. Now we want to merge these two guys together. Okay, and I'm going to create a merge node. Hit the tab and type in merge, and then I'm going to click and drag this guy. And I want to view this result now. So I'm going to click here, and you can see the sphere and the box are merged together. Cool. So I think this is pretty much it for the UI and everything, I'm gonna go back to the upper level. So I'm gonna click here, and now we're back at the object level. You can see that we don't see pardon me, the box or the sphere, which is the geo node, and you can have as many as you want. You can have this group, you can create another geometry and have more data in it, and this is how you categorize the data in Houdini. And in terms of UI, the only thing I'm going to change is I'm going to close this guy here, okay? And this is that was the UI for where we see the properties. And I like to use this approach because it gives me more space to work with. If you select any node and press P, it's going to give you this floating tab here with the geometry. Pardon me. So it's going to give you this property. You can hit P again and it will hide, and now we have more space to work with inside this panel. And this is the settings that I like. Actually, let me close these guys as well, and now we can dive inside. This is our data. If we want to see any options for the node, we just have to have the UI open. You can see it changes every time we select a node to give us the options to control it. And I think that's pretty much it. One last note is if you make changes to the UI, you have to save the settings. I'm going to go under build here and save current desktop. I want to make this UI as my default, so I'm going to hit save current desktop, and that saved. I can close and it will come back and be at this configuration. Now it will expand all these guys, but we don't have to worry about that. We can hide them. This is shortcuts for basically creating nodes and things like that, and we're not going to be using that. I want to show you guys how to create everything from scratch and not have to rely on shelf tools. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.